States is positioned to cultivate mutually beneficial relationships with our African partners, to strengthen America's strategic position on the continent, to unlock economic prosperity across the continent. Your role as ambassador to China, as you just described, will be incredibly influential and highly consequential in curbing China's influence in regions critical to U.S. interests. The actions you take in Beijing and elsewhere will inform U.S. policy globally on how to deal with Chinese malign influence. How do you intend to coordinate the embassy's actions with state to ensure that we're synchronized in our efforts to compete with China globally?
In bureaucratic Washington, Senator, after what I've gone through the last 4 months, that is a very important question. And I will tell you that I don't have all the answers to that one yet. I've not been in this government, as you know. I was in the Senate for a while. But I'm going to use that portfolio out there to establish credibility with our host country. I think that's very important. I will applaud the United States for maintaining as much of a nonpartisan approach to China as anybody, really, of the last 20 years. And so my focus is going to be on building a communication platform that we can make sure they don't miscalculate and they don't underestimate the United States.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Conservative Chronicle. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our latest videos on international affairs, U.S. policy, and global economics. In today's video, I'm diving into a powerful warning issued by Senator Ted Cruz about China's growing influence. From Africa to critical minerals, Cruz has serious concerns about China's control over global supply chains and what this means for the U.S. economy and national security. Stick around as I break it all down.
Senator Perdue, let's start with you. I believe the Chinese Communist Party poses a global threat and that it has to be dealt with globally. I want to turn to Africa, a region where China is making considerable inroads. The Chinese Communist Party's influence across the continent of Africa is growing by the day, undermining American interest and trapping African nations into debt traps. I intend to hold a hearing on this issue in the Africa and Global Health Subcommittee, but I want to ask you now, how do you view Chinese malign influence in Africa?
Well, as I just said to the ranking member's question, it's one of the great threats that we've got to address, and not only that, it's South America as well, or Latin America. As you well know, and by the way, I am glad to finally realize who is responsible for your eloquent capability, and I give Dr. Crowley that credit. So I'm glad to finally realize that. So what I'm concerned about is that the malign influence relative to what looks like on the front end is a helping hand, which is really not a helping hand. As I said, they don't hire locals. They pick weak partners they can foreclose on, like they did in Karachi and Colombo, and I'm greatly concerned about that. We have military personnel at risk in Africa today, as you well know, being on armed services. So these things tie together. As ambassador to China, I think my portfolio is bigger than just sitting in Beijing. I think being the U.S. ambassador of the United States to China gives me the portfolio to have influence with other ambassadors and other leaders around the world. I'm going to use that, if confirmed.
The United States
Stick around as I break it all down. Senator Ted Cruz is not shy about his concerns when it comes to China. He's made it clear that the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is not just a local threat to the U.S., but a global one. The CCP is expanding its reach into every corner of the world, from Africa to South America, and it's starting to have serious consequences for American interests. Cruz warns that if the U.S. doesn't take action now, we could be facing a situation where our adversaries control the global supply chains we rely on every single day. Let's talk about Africa. Cruz points out that China is making massive investments across the continent. But the truth behind these deals isn't as innocent as it seems.
As you said in your testimony, many of America's strategic supply chains are, quote, in the hands of our adversaries. I'm especially concerned about China's control over global supply chains. We all saw this play out during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a wake-up call to Americans realizing how much of our economy is intertwined with China's in ways that they hadn't seen before. I believe we must do everything we can to de-link our economy from China, and that means working lock and step with our allies and partners to achieve that goal. One critical area that we need to de-link from China is critical minerals. They affect every single part of how our economy runs, from computers and cars that we use daily to the defense technology and weapon systems that protect our nation. The CCP knows this, and they've spent decades securing control over global critical mineral supply chains as part of their broader civil-military fusion strategy to threaten our economic security.
Seems. On the surface, it might look like China is simply helping to build infrastructure, but in reality, these loans often come with strings attached, leaving African nations trapped in crippling debt. One of the most alarming parts of Cruz's warning is China's control over critical minerals. From rare earth elements that power our smartphones and electric cars to the minerals needed for defense technology, China has strategically positioned itself to dominate these resources. Cruz explains that the U.S. once led the world in mining and processing these minerals, but now we've fallen behind. This dominance gives China a significant advantage, and it's not just about economic power, it's a national security issue. The U.S. needs to decouple from China, and quickly. So what's the U.S.?
Tell me a little bit about how you see China's dominance over critical minerals affecting America's economic interests and national security interests.
We allowed it to happen, Senator. We sat back as America, as Congress and various administrations. This is not partisan. We allowed it to happen. In the early 2002, 80% of rare earth elements were processed right here in the United States. We mined our own. We've got a couple hundred years of resources to pull on. You see what China has done when the heat got turned up here recently. They embargoed 2 of those critical minerals, as you just said. It's not just rare earth elements. Shipbuilding. We did 80% of the world's commercial shipbuilding just 2 decades ago. Today, we'll drop 1 hull this year.
So what's the U.S. doing about it? Cruz is calling for a more aggressive and coordinated response from U.S. diplomats. He believes that the role of ambassador to China is not just about dealing with Beijing, but also influencing other global leaders and ambassadors to take a united stand against China's economic and military expansion. It will require tough decisions and cooperation with allies to reduce dependence on Chinese-controlled industries. To wrap things up, Ted Cruz's warning about China is a call to action for the U.S. We're at a critical point where our economic and national security interests are at risk. If we don't take steps...
If you look at what we're doing in steel, for example, we had a renaissance a few years ago. These critical industries that China has done their civil-military fusion with, as you just described perfectly, is critical. We have been asleep at the wheel for 30 years. I give President Trump a lot of credit for stepping up and trying to communicate a very difficult strategy that may not be as easy as everybody thinks it will on the American people. There will be some pain in executing what we have to do to stand up and defend our own freedom. It's just that serious, Senator.
If we don't take steps now to decouple from China, we might find ourselves at the mercy of an adversary with too much control over the things we depend on. What do you think about Cruz's warning? How do you think the U.S. should respond to China's growing influence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more content on this and other critical global issues. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.